Hey students, I'm Dr. Zachariah Renfro, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our reading this week. So in this week's reading we covered moral realism, anti-realism, moral objectivity, and moral relativism. I'm going to go through each of these in a little bit of detail and explain them to you to help you better with this week's assignment. So the first thing we have is moral realism. So that's the idea that there are objective moral facts. There are things about morality that can be either true or false. So in that way, morality, much like any other science, has facts which can be true. And this helps explain things such as the moral progress that we see in society. Society going from at one point believing, slavery was justifiable to slavery no longer being justifiable. The moral facts of those things were discovered as time went on. So that's moral realism. Anti-realism is the opposite of that. Anti-realism says that moral facts are not like any other fact. There's no such thing as a moral fact, and that whatever we might assume to be a moral fact is just an artifact of culture or an artifact of individual identity, and not so much something that's objectively true or false about the world. Which leads us to the various kinds of moral relativism. The opposite of moral relativism is moral objectivism, again, which relates to moral realism, that idea that there are objectively true moral facts about the world. So we'll start with descriptive realism. This is the most tame form of moral relativism. It's this idea that what we see or know or experience about morality is just an artifact of culture. There could still be objective moral facts. However, what we see is just what tends to happen as societies grow and come together, and these different moral practices come online, such as certain burial rites or marriage traditions, polygamy versus monogamy, things of that nature. The next step, as we get more dramatic in relativism, is meta-ethical relativism. This is the idea that moral truths are only true to a certain group of people. So for example, one society might believe that polygamy is okay, and another society believe that only monogamy is okay. So each of those societies has their own moral facts which are true to them, but do not apply to other societies. We get a little bit more intense into relativism, and that's the idea of normative relativism, which is that there is no way that anyone can judge any moral facts to be superior or inferior to any other moral fact. Now, when we hear this, that sounds pretty extreme, because that allows everything from, polygamy to child sacrifice, and, we as people in another society would just have to accept those things and say, oh, well, that's just their society. Who are we to judge? That's just the way they do things. So that takes us to, some of the problems of relativism and problems of moral diversity. So when you have something like moral relativism, this idea that there's no such thing as an objectively true moral fact, you get an issue where how do societies with different groups of people interact? You have one group of people in a society that believes, for example, polygamy should be okay, another group that says monogamy should be okay. So how can you justify those things if, relativism were to be true, and if there's no objective moral fact? In that case, it would come down to either a legislative or a might versus right type of situation. The legislative situation being whatever group is in power makes laws to determine right or wrong, and the might versus right would be whoever has the strongest ability can say what's right or wrong. So if we look all the way back to Plato, back in his Republic, when in his talks with Thrasymachus, and Thrasymachus says, well, explain to me, why morality isn't just might versus right. The moral relativist would say, hey, Thrasymachus was right. Plato, that guy was wrong. All of his ideas about morality and virtue and, live in a certain way, those were wrong. Thrasymachus was right, and it's just whoever has the most power is the most moral. So when we get into the objections to relativism, the first one is when it comes to moral ideas across communities. How many people does it take to make a community? Is 100 people enough? 1,000 people enough? A village? A town? A family? What constitutes a moral community? When does a group of people get large enough to have its own moral standards, whatever those might be? The next problem is some things to us just seem to be wrong. It's an evolutionary reaction. So if we've evolved a certain way to think that some things are wrong, such as, the torture of children, it would seem to be that would be an objective moral fact, right? If you are a human being, if you're a type of species human, then, certain things are wrong because that's part of our evolutionary programming. The next thing is, if we are to take relativism at face value, and if we live in a multicultural society, how do we deal with people who have views which we might find morally abhorrent, such as views related to stoning of women or of female genital mutilation or of castration or things of those natures? How do we deal with people who have these diverse views if we are to say that moral relativism is the correct way to go? The next problem is, if moral relativism of any sort is true, then it doesn't really open the way for a lot of social reform. We go all the way back to Thrasymachus, and it seems that social reform can't come through the evolution or discovery of moral principles, but only through force. Because at that point, any group of people can have a view, for example, such as slavery being justifiable, and they would be justified in their view because they're a community and they couldn't be judged effectively by other communities. So that seems to be a very serious problem for moral relativism. And when we take these problems into consideration, as our reading mentions, a survey of philosophers found that only 27.7% of philosophers are moral relativists. So with that being the case, it would seem that the majority of the philosophy community has come together to say that moral objectivism seems to be the right way to go. And, as for myself, I'm also of that view. It wouldn't seem to make much sense that a person could study ethics or study morality if there were no truth to be found at the end of it. If the end result of a lifetime of study and research and morality was that there is no moral truth, then, the whole of ethics as a field of study has just been a waste. I think Alistair MacIntyre and a few other modern thinkers really hit the nail on the head. Studies across groups of people in different countries and cultures have shown that majorities of people tend to find certain things wrong. There tend to be what you might call some set of universal cultural values. For example, respect for elders or caring for small children. It's one of MacIntyre's famous works. They took surveys of people across the world and found that, there are certain things that all these societies tend to agree on. So I think that part of that might just be due to our existence as humans. Because we are humans, there are certain facts, moral facts that relate to being humans. In the same way that humans need air to breathe, water to drink, they need so many calories to survive, there are also certain moral rules that allow us to function and live in a society or to function as healthy individuals. And if we spur or disdain those rules, then it's bad for society and bad for us as individuals. Anyways, I hope this little lecture helps you with our assignment. Don't forget, you have to do your initial forum post by Thursday, and I look forward to interacting with all of you. Thank you.